all three men were shot through the head at point-blank range.
I think these people are more than street dealers. It may be that the shooting has occurred over higher drugs dealers trying to find a greater position of power.
Lawyers seize on police discrepancies. Lawyers for two men accused of a gangland's drugs execution seized upon inconsistencies in police evidence. The bodies of drug dealers Craig Rolfe, Tony Tucker and Patrick Tate were found inside a Range Rover in Rettendon on December 7th, 1995. They'd been blasted to death with a shotgun the night before down a remote workhouse lane. The Old Bailey herd, Jack Womes and Michael Steele, lured them to their deaths with the promise of a lucrative cocaine deal. Police officers descended upon the murder scene when it was discovered by a farmer and his friend on the way to feed pheasants. Scenes of crimes officers Detective Inspector Hughes and Detective Constable Peter Beatus combed the area and made a note of all the evidence collected. However, the officers disagree on where one particular shotgun cartridge was found, and despite hundreds of photographs being taken, there was not one of a cartridge Detective Constable Beatus claims he recovered from the Range Rover's rear footwell. He admitted it may have been accidentally kicked into the position he found it. Steele's QC, Graham Parkins, who has quizzed each witness about their movements at the scene. Despite a cordon being put up, at least one member of the press wandered upon to the scene. It is just an unhappy factor of this investigation from day one. Detective Constable Beatus said, "Press people were all around at the time. It was difficult to get away from them. The Range Rover, covered by a tarpaulin, was transported to a police garage at South Woodham Ferris, where the three bodies were removed. Craig Rolfe was found to have £104 on him, passenger Tucker at £870, and Tate, who was in the back seat, had £480. In the boot was an empty head sports bag. Detective Constable Beatus confirmed none of Steele's fingerprints were found on any exhibit seized at the scene. Drink and computer games in cell claim. A Supergrass played cards and chatted about his favourite hobbies with murder squad detectives in a triple killing investigation. An Old Bailey jury heard police informant Darren Nichols also had the use of a Nintendo computer games console and a fridge packed with ice cold drinks as he sat in his prison cell waiting to give statements. Defending barrister David Letterman QC, representing 36-year-old Jack Womes, who was jointly charged with the triple killings, claimed officers investigating the murders had forged a unique friendship with Nichols and accused one detective of telling lie upon lie as he cross-examined him on the witness stand. Mr. Letterman QC asked Essex Detective Constable Christopher Winstone, "Was part of your welfare trips to Mr. Nichols to play cribbage with him?" DC Winston replied, "No, it wasn't me. It was Detective Sergeant Crayling who played with him." Mr. Letterman said, "Certainly a relationship must have been forming." DC Winston replied, "Yes, sir." Mr. Letterman said, "And Nichols ended up recognising you as his friend?" DC Winston replied, "No." The jury was then shown photographs of Nichols' cell, complete with a Nintendo game system and a fridge full of drinks. Mr. Letterman said, "When he was not being visited by you, he clearly had some methods of keeping himself amused." DC Winston replied, "Yes, sir." The court heard Winston and his colleague, Detective Constable Michael Brown, had struck up a unique rapport with Nichols following hours of welfare visits. Mr. Letterman, during cross-examination of DC Brown, claimed the versions of events surrounding Rettendon that Nichols first told officers was completely different to the one that was told in court. And it is alleged that Nichols had first been told by DC Brown that tape recordings of the Supergrass telling police about the murders would not be handed to the defence counsel. Mr. Letterman said, "Why did you say this when it was completely wrong?" DC Brown replied, "In hindsight, if I'd been asked that question now, I would have not have told him that. I would have told him that the tapes would be handed to the defence counsel." Mr. Letterman said, "Mr. Brown, may I suggest to you that you are lying, lying and lying as you go along?" DC Brown replied, "I am certainly not lying to you, sir." Earlier, the court had heard that Nichols had first told the police he believed he was taking Jack Womes to a drugs meet in an airfield, and that the plan was to kill the pilot of a waiting aircraft, steal the merchandise, and then blow up the plane. Supergrass always on my doorstep. A triple murder defendant has made sensational claims that the prosecution's star witness was a major drug smuggler who'd admitted he was willing to kill. Michael Steele, along with Jack Williams, has been charged with ruthlessly executing drug dealers Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, began his evidence on the first day of the defence case. Looking relaxed in a grey tweed jacket and a blue open-neck shirt, the 54-year-old walked a short distance from the dock to the witness box, flanked by a lone security guard. His barrister, Graham Parkins QC, questioned him about some of the evidence the jury had already heard in this long-running trial. When it came to the topic of Supergrass Darren Nichols, who provides the basis of the prosecution case, Steele said they'd met in Hollinsey Bay Prison in Suffolk. He revealed, "I found there were two sides to him, a very silly side and a very educated side. He's what I would call an habitual, always turning up on my doorstep. It was during one of these visits to Steele's home in St Mary's Red Great Bentley, Essex, from which Steele ran his business, that Nichols allegedly made his astonishing confession." Steele told a spellbound Old Bailey jury it was after Nichols had visited Basildon Hospital in November 1994, where Tate was being treated for a gunshot wound to his arm. He said, "Nichols told me, I could do that, I could shoot someone. I've often thought to myself about it." When you got to know Nichols, he was quite schizophrenic. When he said this, he was standing with his hands in his pockets and his head bowed. He looked like a child that had been scalded. Steele said that Nichols had been very upset by his visit to the hospital, as Tate and his friends had ridiculed him. Steele also told the jury that Nichols was a drugs importer who brought cannabis into the country via car ferries, using drivers known as suicide jockeys. Mr Parkins then asked Steele about his relationship with victim Pat Tate, who dealt drugs in jail and often took up to 8 ecstasy tablets a day himself. Steele said, "When I first knew him, he had a magnetic personality, and while 70% of people liked him, 30% of people loved him, but he gradually changed into a junkie." Steele also talked about his close friendship with co-defendant Jack Williams, who met in prison for a shared love of boats. The trial continues. Michael Steele admitted he was no stranger to the criminal courts. His defence barrister, Graham Parkins QC, asked, "Is it true that you are content for the jury to know things about your past?" He replied, "I would like the jury to know everything there is to know about me." Mr Parkins then read out a long list of previous convictions. March 1964, sent to prison for 12 months for stealing a property and driving whilst disqualified. 1966, sent to prison for 6 months for stealing property and assault causing actual bodily harm. June 1966, a 12-month conditional discharge for stealing from a vehicle. 1968, fined £15 for possession of an offensive weapon, a motorcycle chain. February 1969, an 18-month jail term suspended for 3 years for trying to cheat customs of oil duty. March 1972, sentenced to 5 years in prison for theft from a motor vehicle. February 1980, suspended sentence of 6 months for theft. September 1980, sent to jail for 12 months for stealing tyres and wheels and being in breach of a suspended sentence. 1986, a 1-year conditional discharge for criminal damage. And June 1990, 9 years in prison for importing 300 kilos of cannabis in a light aircraft. Steele, a highly experienced pilot, was also ordered to hand over to customs £120,000, half his former marital home, £15,000 from his mum's home, his 33-foot motor cruiser, his aircraft, and his Land Cruiser.